January 19th, 1976, was the day Adelaide, capital city of South Australia, and home to 800,000 people, was going to be destroyed. A massive earthquake would wreck the buildings, and the dazed survivors would be clambering amid the ruins as a gigantic tsunami would surge in at Glenelg and sweep the Adelaide plain clean of its sinful populace. Between 10:30am and noon, Adelaide and its people would vanish from the face of the earth. That at least was the prediction of a certain John Nash of Maylands, an inner-city suburb. He knew with certainty because God had revealed his plan for the Old Testament-style punishment on the new Gomorrah. Nash was a house painter by trade who had a staunchly conservative religious view on homosexuality. He had moved from his hometown of Melbourne to Adelaide, but was much perturbed by social change in Adelaide in the 1970s. He claimed he had seen a vision of the destruction of Adelaide 3 months earlier while gardening. Nash said he had had such visions since he was a boy, and had moved to Adelaide from Brisbane because he had foreseen floods which hit that city after he left. The South Australian Government passed the Criminal Law Sexual Offences Amendment Act on the 2nd of October 1975, decriminalising homosexual acts between consenting men 17 years and older. The Premier, Don Dunstan, had first attempted to muster support for such law reform in the 1960s, but Adelaide was far too staid to accept this. However, by the 1970s, attitudes on many social issues were changing to a more libertarian outlook. Then a shocking event gave the final impetus. A 41-year-old gay law lecturer from the University of Adelaide, Dr. George Ian Duncan, was strolling by the banks of the Torrens River on the night of the 10th of May, 1972. It was a known meeting spot for gay men for many decades, despite the dangers of arrest by police and violence from bigots. Dr. Duncan had only taken up his position at the nearby university on the 25th of March. At about 11pm, a group of off-duty police vice squad officers had arrived at the river after a party looking for gay men to abuse. They threw 2 of the men they found into the dark, cold, dirty water. Dr. Duncan drowned. Although the men responsible evaded justice, debate in the community swung against discrimination and the implied tacit social support for random acts of violence the law provided. The decriminalisation was the first by an Australian state, and it gravely concerned John Nash. He joined the Metropolitan Community Church, a modern church welcoming and supportive of the many gay people in the congregation. Nash joined and attempted to convert members away from homosexuality, although it seems with little success. He predicted that the church's leader, Reverend Stanley J. Harris, would be stricken with a terrible sickness in October 1975, and that the church would collapse forever in November 1975. Harris did not suffer any malady, and the church did not collapse. It finally closed its doors in July 2005. Reverend Harris had departed for the USA not long after the events of January 1976, and remains there still ministering to his flock today, having survived a heart attack in 2005 and a bout of cancer in 2009. Despite the failure of these 2 predictions, Nash nevertheless made public his vision of a devastating cataclysm in October 1975. Nash sold his house and left for Western Australia on the 3rd of January 1976. Before he left, he said he was receiving phone calls threatening him if anything were to happen. The prophecy gained attention locally, but also internationally. It was promoted more in English newspapers than in Australian ones. Despite attempts to allay fears by scientists and religious leaders, for instance, Greek Orthodox priests were giving special blessings to homes, as the day nominated grew closer, a weird atmosphere developed in the city. Adelaide, known as the Athens of the South, had become a wicked city. Since the mid-1960s, some people reasoned. Hotels no longer had to close their doors at 6pm. Abortion was legalised. A state lottery introduced, and a public holiday granted to celebrate the Adelaide Cup horse race, while a nude bathing beach was proclaimed at Maslands. Now even homosexuality was condoned. Some people, mainly Greek and Italian migrants, with a limited grasp on English, thought a credible geologist had forecast a seismic event. Perhaps because of terrible quakes in the histories of their homelands, many fled Adelaide for towns inland, where they stayed in caravan parks for safety. One young couple arrived along with their pet goldfish in a bowl of water. Parks at Barmera, Berry and Renmark were said to be full on the eve of the big day, but empty again the next night. Some, it is said, even sold their houses and moved permanently. The Canberra Times on the 12th of January reported that 3 families were known to have sold their homes and moved interstate because of the prediction. Others went up into the Adelaide Hills for the day, their most prized possessions filling their cars, and many families kept children close, it being the school holidays. It was rumoured beachfront motels near Glenelg had a drop of 75% in occupancy. Other people who were due to leave Adelaide for holidays lingered, lest they be thought to be among those giving credence to the prediction. One woman who was ill went to work anyway, just to show she was not one of those frightened by the foretelling. Another man had to apologise to his boss for taking the day off work, because his wife was so terrified by the silly prediction that he had to stay home and comfort her. One woman from Liverpool in the UK phoned her daughter because she had heard Adelaide was being evacuated. Another woman received a concerned call from a relative in Sacramento, California. Some people in Adelaide itself phoned the police to ask advice on what they should do if the quake and tsunami arrived. Adding fuel to the fire, a Sydney astrologer, Richard Sterling, announced on the 16th of January that South Australia could suffer some sort of natural disaster between January 17th and 24th, with the 19th and 20th the worst days. Sterling said in addition to the movement of the planets, he based his forecast on reports that snails were leaving ground level and crawling up onto the roofs of houses. Most people, however, treated the spectacular prediction as a joke. Families held pre-earthquake parties on the weekend. The Old Lion Hotel in North Adelaide hosted their own earthquake party, saying that it really shakes until 11:30 p.m. to the thunderous applause of our happy patrons. Other businesses used the prophecy as a marketing gimmick. Even before the end of 1975, a used car dealer advertised, "Earthquake clearance sale. Prices are crumbling. Buy your escape machine early." Eastern Projects, a manufacturer and retailer of pool tables, invited people to a pre-earthquake sellout in a newspaper ad run on the 14th of January. "Before it's too late, inspect our range of seconds and damaged stock." Glynde Auto Wreckers had an earthquake clearance sale on Saturday the 17th of January, and massage parlours offered tidal wave specials, urging clients to come in and enjoy themselves before it's too late. At Glenelg, one local entrepreneur sold disaster survival kits for $1. They included a balloon for buoyancy, party whistles and bangers to attract rescuers' attention, a disaster card for writing your last message, and a King Neptune party hat. He was said to have done a roaring trade. Office workers went to their jobs on the day wearing flippers, goggles and snorkels. Others carried their beach towels, and some even donned wetsuits and took in surfboards. A group of people with surfboards gathered on Mount Lofty, the highest point of the Adelaide Hills, overlooking the city and the sea. One joker appeared at Glenelg wearing top hat and tails, saying that he wanted to go out in style. An executive sent a memo to staff on the Friday beforehand, urging his workers to come to work, because if something did happen, it was better to die at work, as they'd be covered by workers' compensation. By sheer chance, the chief of the Natural Disasters Organisation, Major General Stretton, was in Adelaide to give a talk. He said his organisation regularly received letters predicting disasters that people had seen in dreams. They were filed in the waste paper basket. Stretton blamed the media for whipping up the story during the silly season for the commotion. Particularly television news showing images of real disasters were decried, and threats to have them investigated made by politicians. One man is reported as saying at 11:55 a.m. to a workmate, "I'm going to the toilet. If the tidal wave doesn't come, I'll see you in 10 minutes. If it does, I'll see you on Mount Lofty." At the weapons research establishment at Salisbury, workers were given life jackets, a kayak and a paddle, just in case. Someone went to Eagle on the Hill, a high point in the hills where the highway to Melbourne snaked around, and on a concrete wall there drew a line, and beside it wrote, "High Tide 1976. The graffito was still visible 40 years later. Others with strong religious views took advantage of Nash's pronouncement. The Christadelphians said the earthquake would not occur on the 19th, but when Jesus returned, a global earthquake would ensue. A free public address was offered at 3 locations on the evening preceding the 19th to explain this. The Adelaide Crusade Centre claimed that many people had spoken fearfully to them about the prophecy, and invited all and sundry to a lecture on God and earthquakes on the same day. At Glenelg, Don Dunstan was due to be on hand between 10:30 and 12, promising if the big wave came he would repel it in the style of King Canute. A film crew from the BBC was among the media who gathered, as were a Sydney radio program, who set up a live broadcast from the spot, and reporters from Japan. Reverend Harris and members of his church were on hand, and crowds of curious onlookers joined in. The 19th of January was a perfect day to be at the beach. Following a hot weekend with temperatures in the 30s, the temperature on Monday reached 26.6 degrees Celsius during the day. It was fine and clear, and the sea sparkled blue-green. About 2,000 people made the trek to Glenelg. Some carried signs imploring the sinful to repent. Others carried signs saying, "Surf's up," and "Fortune cookies don't lie." Reverend Harris was there with a few supporters to vindicate the gay community from the blame for the disaster that had not happened. When Don Dunstan emerged from his car near the Glenelg Town Hall in his trademark safari suit, shouts of "Good on you, Don," could be heard as the crowd mobbed him, and children eagerly sought his autograph. The time came, and a multitude of eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of a tidal wave. Nothing. The ground failed to convulse. The minutes ticked by, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. The Premier had gone to the Pier Hotel and refreshed himself. Standing on the balcony, he was cheered by the crowd in Moseley Square below. Eventually midday neared, and in the final moments before noon a countdown was made by the crowd. Noon came, but no disaster. He dismissively turned his back on the sea. The crowd cheered. The prediction had failed miserably. The whole thing was ridiculous, was Dunstan's summing up of the premonition. Reverend Harris flippantly commented, "Nash's hotline to God has run cold." Nash, however, still held out hope. He had gone to Melbourne to stay with his aunt a week before. When phoned by the Advertiser newspaper at 5:30 in the evening for a comment, he said that he predicted the event for the 19th, but didn't say it would be in the morning. It could still happen, and he believed it would. Nash said, "I would say to those people who have gone away not to hurry back, because there is still 1 or 2 days left on which it could happen. I would give it an extra day." Told of the comment by the Premier, who said he didn't want to see Mr. Nash back in Adelaide, Nash said, "My reply to Mr. Dunstan is, if Mr. Nash wants to come back to Adelaide, he will come. But unfortunately, there'll be nothing to come back to." This was not the first time that a prediction of a tidal wave had flustered the folk of Adelaide. In February 1869, a rumour circulated that a great tidal wave would soon inundate low-lying land in Port Adelaide. Just like 107 years later, some people had left their homes, or were preparing to seek refuge in the Adelaide Hills. The Express and Telegraph newspaper had this to say in their edition of the 3rd of February 1869. "It is really marvellous that in this enlightened age anyone could be found so weak-minded as to heed such absurd predictions." A real tidal wave did strike Glenelg at 7 a.m. on the 20th of November 1902. The tide suddenly rose 6 feet above its normal level in a few minutes, and water surged forwards 200 feet past the high water mark and raced up the Sturt River for half a mile. The backwash carried away an old shooting gallery, but no other damage was done, and the few bathers present managed to flee without harm. It's not known for certain if John Nash ever paid a visit to Adelaide again or not. It was said he moved to a small town in New South Wales, and not long after moving there had his home ruined in a flood. While such an aftermath would have been a bizarre coda to this already strange story, there is no evidence it was true. If he ever made any more predictions, nobody cared, and he disappeared into the dark corners of history.